the audio. Hi. That's good. I'm Don Robbins, for those of you who don't know me, and I have a feedback signal. Maybe you want to turn it down just a hair. I think that's good. And I'll talk a little louder. Embracing modular development patterns in Salesforce is the topic of this presentation, and it's interesting is that of the three presentations, at least three presentations going on, there is a presentation going on clean code, and this is similar, although it's an adjunct, and then there's a presentation going on coding concepts for admins. This is more for developers. It is definitely a programmer topic, but that doesn't mean that you have to be a programmer to get value from it. There's a subtitle to this presentation, Embracing Modular Development Patterns in Apex, or Eluding Mondo Mania. And we're going to talk about what Mondo Mania is in just a second. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don Robbins. I'm a Salesforce MVP. I'm certified. I don't hold a lot of certifications. I've been a developer for 30 years. I hold the Salesforce Platform 2 developer certification. I'm a Salesforce training partner. I teach Salesforce for Salesforce, but I'm independent. Most of the instructors around the world are independent, and I have a team of instructors. So I've been teaching Salesforce for upwards of 10 years, focusing primarily on development. I've written books, posts, blogs, co-authored a book on Visualforce produced by Salesforce a couple of years ago, Visualforce in Practice. And of late, I've been focusing on creating a series of courses for Pluralsight.com, which we call the Salesforce Play-by-Plays, which I interview members from the Salesforce Ohana, some who are seated here. We're even going to be doing some recordings this weekend. So that's me, enough about me. A quick straw poll, how many of you consider yourself coders? Would you hold up your hand? Okay. Of the people who held up their hand, how many of you consider yourself very proficient or expert coders? Oh, that's interesting, I noticed a lot of this. And how many here are not coders at all, but clearly you must have some interest in code if you're here? A few, good, that's exactly right. So what's my goal? I don't know if you can see that really well. Anybody know what movie this is from? Clockwork Orange? Yeah. My goal is to open your eyes, and that's usually my goal. I focus on enlightening around things that people don't know that they don't know. I hope to expose you to some software development patterns that layer your code base and decouple application complexity. Decouple application complexity. Now, I have a not goal, an anti-goal. It is not to brainwash you to adopt any kind of software development architectural framework, and we're going to talk about what a framework is. Sometimes scares people away from code. That might require you to redesign your code base and max out your code limit in Salesforce. I'm not going there. We're not going to do that. What we're going to talk about is sort of the what, the why, the how, and then the where. And what this means is, I'm going to talk about what I'm talking about, this concept of decoupling. We're going to talk about why it's really important to bring it into the conscious mind when you're thinking about coding, especially on Salesforce. I'm not going to focus too much on the how. We don't have enough time. We've only got about 35 minutes. I'm going to do a little bit of the how. I'm going to show you some code examples. But mostly I'm going to show you where to get more information, because I like to curate. And once we identify the problem, I'm going to give you the opportunity to go get this presentation, which is actually online, and download it to your device or your computer, and either follow along or go back later, because there's a lot of content in this presentation. This is an online presentation hosted on Git Pages, and it's got a lot of live links. So the idea here is, I've got over 100 slides in 35 minutes, do the math. That usually doesn't work. Many of these slides I won't spend more than a second or two on. I'm just going to point you at something, and you can go back later, you could bookmark it, and then you could go chase it later. So I'm going to give you a lot of information to follow up on later about the how. And that's what the where is, where you can learn more about the concepts. All right, so let's go. Let's identify the problem. Who knows who this is? Anybody know who this is? Nobody knows this movie. It's a movie. This is Mongo. Nobody knows Mongo. Okay, I'm in Europe. The actor was Alex Karras. This is from the movie Blazing Saddles. Anybody know the movie Blazing Saddles? Hey, we got one in the back. So do yourself a favor. Blazing Saddles was an amazingly biting American satirical comedy. Mel Brooks. How many of you know Mel Brooks? Okay, I'm in Europe. Would think I'd know Mel Brooks. Yeah, we got one. Go watch this movie if you want a good laugh. Mongo is a character in the movie, and he is a dumb, dim-witted, enormous, stupid man, and he's hired as a henchman by the evil people in the town who are trying to take over the town and scare away all the townspeople so they can sell the town to the railroad. This is an American Western satirical. And Mongo gets his name from the word humongous, which actually the etymology of humongous is a fusion of huge, monstrous and tremendous. And Mongo is a thoughtless brute. He is a thoughtless brute. So before we continue, that's a QR code to the presentation. If you want to take a picture of it, download the link. There is a link here if you want to go to the link. And you can also get this a little bit later. I'll leave this up for a second. This is also displayed on the last slide of the presentation, but I like to put it here because when I teach for Salesforce, we give the content that we're working with to the students so you can follow along, and you might want to bookmark stuff, all right? Don't want to spend much more time on it, but that should take you to the link. All right, so what in the world does Mongo have to do with Salesforce? Well, Mongo is very similar to another term of art, Mondo, and both of these come from the Latin root mon, which has the meaning warn, and you might be familiar with it in such words as admonish, monitor, monster, premonition. Now don't confuse this root mon with the Greek root mono from mons, which means one, right? Like monarch, monotheism, monogamy, etc. This is different. This means warn. Mondo as an adjective means very large or great in amount or number, with a hint of a warning, meaning that the fact that it is large or great in number is not a good thing, right? That's not a good thing. And there's something called Mondo coding patterns. So here's where we sort of diverge into software. A Mondo coding pattern is a programming practice where excessive amounts of code are haphazardly contained in any single programmatic construct. A lot of stuff, a lot of code, excessively, haphazardly in one particular construct. And in the programming world, Mondo coding patterns are considered an anti-pattern. What's an anti-pattern? Very important to know what an anti-pattern really is. The term gets thrown around a lot. An anti-pattern is commonly used, I'll lower my audio. Am I going in the wrong direction? There we go. Commonly used process, structure, or pattern expected to be effective, but it will have unintended consequences, and especially important, where a better and proven way exists. In other words, an anti-pattern isn't an anti-pattern unless there's a good pattern that exists to do the thing that the anti-pattern is being used to attempt. The good pattern really works, and we know it works, and it's reusable. If there's a proper way to do it, that other way is an anti-pattern. If you want to read about anti-patterns, here's the link to the Wikipedia article. Don't worry about it now, but you can go there and read up all about it. Back to Mondomania. Mondomania is a preponderance and ever-expanding use of Mondo coding anti-patterns, and it runs rampant in Salesforce orgs, everywhere. Is there anyone in the room who has a Salesforce org, I'm expecting Sander to raise his hand, who doesn't have Mondomania in their org? Okay, good, happy to hear it. You join the club with Sander. Mondomania is thoughtless and brutish, like Mongo. So this is what ties us back to Mongo. Now, how do you detect Mondo coding patterns in your code? It's very simple. They smell like Mongo, right? And there are things called code smells. And a code smell is simply a characteristic of code that suggests that there's a problem, that a pattern is not being used properly, or maybe not at all, or an anti-pattern is being used. And you can read about code smells here on Wikipedia. And here are some Mondo coding anti-pattern smells: excessive line length, excessive conditional branching, excessive loops, excessive nested logic, excessive DML operations, excessive mixed concerns, and we're going to talk about this one a lot. They're all excessive, right? This is too much. And where do they hide out in your Salesforce org? Well, obvious places. Apex triggers, Apex class methods, including controllers or controller extensions, Visualforce pages, for those who still have Visualforce pages, Lightning components, and even the JavaScript logic inside Lightning components, whether Aura or even Lightning web components. Now, we're going to focus on Apex triggers and Apex class methods because we don't have much time, and let's sniff out some examples. This class, I don't know if you can read it well, but perhaps you can follow it. This class is on a Git, it's on a gist in GitHub, and this was the very first class that I cut my teeth on in Salesforce about 10 years ago. It already existed for a customer, and I was given the task, I don't think I can bump the font any higher, but basically I was given the task of modifying it. And I always dissect a piece of code. Well, what is it doing? Okay, well, if you can't see it, it's basically, it's called Mondo sample here, but I think it was like decouple, or the calc class. I think the method is decouple. And I said, all right, well, let me see how many methods are in this class. So I started to scroll down the class, and I kept going, oh, there's a bunch of if and else's, and I kept going down, oh, there's some more nested if and else's, and I kept going down, oh, there's a for loop with a SOQL query, there's some more conditional branch, oh, there's another for loop, okay, there's another, oh, look, there's some system exception stuff, there's some DML, there's a bunch of DML, conditional DML, more conditional logic, oh, there's another for loop, there's another SOQL query, I think you get the idea. Oh, look, it ends, there's one method in this class. You like that? I think it smells a little bit. Let's go look at the next one. Okay, this one's a controller extension. So I started to scan this one. Oh, that's not so bad. A bunch of properties, a bunch of publics, a bunch of getters. Oh, fine, that looks good. They're all in the right place. They're all named well. Okay, some more properties, some more getters, some more getters. Okay, here we go. We've got a, oh look, we've got a controller. All right, there's a controller. A controller does a bunch of stuff. Now we got a bunch of methods, a bunch of getters. Oh look, page reference, here we go. Here's a page reference method. We got some try catch, not so bad. I mean, there's some conditional logic, more conditional logic, more conditional logic, some exception logic, more conditional logic, more conditional, oh, there's a return, that's good. What does that say? Oh, this one, it's another one, more conditional logic, more conditional logic. I mean, you really know what this thing is doing. Oh, and look at this, we keep going, there's some lists. What does that say? Oh, there's some navigate. Okay, well, we got to navigate, that makes sense. It's a controller. Navigate to, got some navigation. Attachments, okay, we got some lists. Something is complete. Oh boy, big query. And more queries. Boy, got some lots of queries. Private void. Oh, set booking attachment. That's interesting. Set default page messages, exception handling. What is this one? Oh, look at that. What does it say? Send notification. Ooh, that's interesting. What is this? It's an email. And I think if I keep going down, there's a whole bunch of stuff that generates some HTML in a body. Okay, so what, you see what I'm saying? There's a lot of stuff in here. And it's really too much to understand at a glance. All right, so what's the solution to this? Now there is another session on clean code, and clean code is absolutely the solution for this. And we're going to define it, but we're not really going to talk about clean code per se. The key point about clean code that you want to know is that code is clean code. It's a noun. It's not a practice. It's not a pattern. It's not a framework. It's a noun, and it means the code that can be understood with little effort. I should be able to understand the code when I look at it as a developer, or maybe even not as a developer, because it is intuitively understandable. Now, how do you achieve it is the key. You have to consciously use good software design principles, patterns, and practices to achieve clean code. And you can read about it there. What's interesting about this, I went looking in Wikipedia for an article on clean code, and the only one I could find was in German. I talked to Christian the other day about this. It's like there's no English version of a clean code article. I mean, you could run it through Google Translate. So either this tells me something about Germans or it tells me something about the English-speaking developer world, because nobody's bothered to create a clean code article. If you want to learn about clean code, go read Uncle Bob's book. And it's a great book. It should be on your bedside. You might fall asleep at night as you're digging through it. It's not an easy read, but it's a really important one. The key point for this presentation is that there's a number of principles that I want to talk about that are specific to helping with Mondomania. And the primary one is separation of concerns. That's what SOC is, separation of concerns. And separation of concerns is a software design principle. It means breaking down your code into distinct sections, each addressing a specific concern. Well, we'll talk about the definition of a concern, but you just saw something in that controller where it was managing the page and the DML, but then it was managing an email notification. That's a different concern than managing a Visualforce page. And that's the idea of what a concern is. Now, there's some Trailhead content. You can go do the Trailhead content about separation of concerns. You can read about it in Wikipedia. But the key point is that a program that embodies separation of concerns well is called a modular program. And the benefits are that they're more extensible, they're more maintainable, they're more testable, they're more reusable, they're more scalable, they're more understandable, and they're more trainable. Why? Why are they all those things? Well, because it simplifies development and maintenance by breaking it up into small pieces. Anytime you break something into smaller pieces, it simplifies it and makes it easier to deal with. When concerns are well separated, the individual sections stand alone. They're less tightly coupled and it's easier to work on them, which means that modifying or improving one doesn't break something else. Because when your code gets all intertwined into big balls of spaghetti, you touch it over here, you break it over there. So it's just common sense. Now you can read about modular programming there, and the key question is, well, how do you implement separation of concerns? Well, we talked about what a concern is. Here's the formal definition: a set of information, data, or logic. It affects some specific behavior or aspect of a software application. Go read the Wikipedia article. Separation of concerns is an implementation approach. It leverages collections of software design patterns. It's not a framework. A lot of times people are afraid to get into separation of concerns because they think they have to go implement some big framework. And a framework is a big, typically, collection of reusable code. It implements a solution to common problems, like separation of concerns, but it can be a lot of stuff, and that can be scary. So oftentimes people will shy away from frameworks and figure out how to deal with the problem some other way. Now, there is software framework, you can read about it there. There is a very common, well-known separation of concerns framework in the Salesforce world, FFLive. FF stands for Financial Force. You guys know who Financial Force is? Big ISV company. Andy Fawcett, who wrote the book, Andy in the Cloud, before he is now director of platform, he was with Financial Force, always pushing the envelope. He wrote about it. The Trailhead content is actually based on his work. A key point here is that frameworks and patterns are not the same thing. And frameworks are implementation of patterns. Design patterns can and should be implemented without a framework. It's much simpler, right? So what's a software design pattern? A reusable solution to a common problem in software design. Read about them there. What separation of concern design patterns can help resolve Mondomania? There's something called a service layer. There's something called a domain layer. There's something called a selector layer and a unit of work. You'll read about these in the FFLive, what's called Apex Enterprise Patterns. There's also trigger handlers. Trigger handlers are software patterns that help with separation of concerns. We're going to talk only about service layers because we don't have much time. A service layer is a set of services, nothing more than software functionalities, methods inside classes for the application's operations and their responses. It's really very simple. You can read about them there. You can do the Trailhead there. Key point, in Apex, service layer serves a very important role to avoid Mondomania. It separates a boundary between the business logic and the logic of what I call the calling execution context client. Now that's a big term. Execution context client that needs to call the business layer. Well, what are those? Well, an execution context client is a class or trigger that is the entry point for the invocation of your Apex, your process. Triggers, controllers, controller extensions, web services, batch classes, schedulers. Those are all execution context clients. They're classes. But that doesn't mean that all the logic that's associated with that entry, that invocation, should be embedded Mondomania style in that class. It should be separated out into a service layer. So normally, you get something like this. Those are nothing more, the colored boxes just represent the different execution context. Controller on the left, SOAP or REST service, I'll read them off, batch scheduler, invocable, Apex, future, queuable classes, and then email handlers and triggers. Those are where things get invoked. Well, it really should be this. In other words, all of that code that you're seeing in each of those context classes shouldn't be there. Only the code that's necessary to manage that execution context client, its concern should be there. Managing a Visualforce page, setting up the call from the trigger, setting up the trigger.new, maybe the traffic cop logic in a trigger, accepting the request from a web service. It should then call out to some other layer about the business logic, and that's what lives in the service layer. So what does an implementation look like? Well, you actually have an opportunity to dissect a really nice little reference application. This is the attendee registration reference app that was built for a play-by-play that I did with another European Salesforce developer, Peter Templey, who's from Budapest, and we did a course on breaking down the Apex Enterprise patterns, and he wrote a great little reference app. And that reference app is available through the course channel, and you can go download it. And this is the service class, and I just want to scroll down and show you how simple this thing is. Again, unfortunately, let me see if I can get a zoom in here. Let's see. Oh, there we go. There we go. How's that? So that first method is just a registration method, takes a map of IDs and IDs, and then it's building some lists and it's doing some looping, and it's only a few lines long. It has a for loop, and then it ends. And then there's this is a validation function, gets passed some information, and it does some validation logic. It's still very short. And then there's a save. There's a save method. Now there's an overloaded save method. This one takes a JSON string, but there's another one a little further down, and it actually takes some kind, this is also a save attendee, and notice that it takes a different kind of parameter data type. So these are overloaded, and that's it. I think there's a private function down here, but there's really not much code here. So let's see how this thing is called, because that's the beauty. The beauty is it's a one-line call, right? This is a Lightning component controller, and here's the call, attendee service, save the attendee, pass the parameter, get back an object. So in the controller for the component, there is no business logic, there is no save logic, there is no DML. That's handed off to that service class. And another example, here's the other save function method being called inside a page reference. This is on a Visualforce page, and this one needs a different kind of data type in the signature call, but basically it's the same idea. It's a one-line call, and in a trigger, again, it's a one-line call in a before trigger to a validation routine with trigger.new. So all the business logic gets delegated into the service layer, and that's what makes it so clean. Decouples complexity, allows reuse from any entry point, encapsulates the concern logic. It organizes where the business logic resides. It's always nice to know where something should be when you're adding more. And it supports SFDX. How many of you are using SFDX? Okay, well, this really supports modular development. Later on, unlock packages. It is an effort. Absolutely, there is an effort, and you have to weigh, well, is it worth my time? Well, if you have evolving requirements, your scope is growing, you're expanding or distributing your team, you have more and more execution contexts that need to call the same logic, building a product, of course, and there's some guidelines. It shouldn't care who calls it, as long as it calls it with what it needs, the signature. It should follow bulkification and limits rules. It should be maintained. If somebody else is now adding functionality, they want to make sure that they add the functionality inside rather than leaking that functionality back Mondomania style into some context client. You want to follow strict naming conventions. It should handle DML transactions. You know, it's one thing if you're just executing a save on a record, it's another if your process is processing a data graph, meaning there's dependencies of children and grandchildren, and there's a special pattern for that called unit of work. And your homework is to go learn about the unit of work pattern by watching the course. They can be synchronous or asynchronous, and they don't have to be Apex. What if you need something and you can't do it in Apex? Well, then you can implement your logic in a web service, and a microservice, which is a web service, and you can host it on Azure or Heroku, and you call it in the same pattern. You call it as a service. Now, we're not going to talk too much about microservices other than to tell you what they are. They're very simple, standalone, loosely coupled little functions that run on some server, very lightweight, totally self-contained. And here's an interesting use case that I had to deal with. I get an email with a PDF attached from Salesforce. I got to take the data, not from the email, I got to take the data from the PDF, and I got to push it into a custom object. Well, Apex can't parse a PDF yet. It's coming. The new AI for Einstein, safe harbor, has optical character recognition. It will be able to read documents. Yes, isn't that it? Supposedly. But I needed to do this 2 years ago, so what I did was I built a web service, and it lives somewhere up there as a little microservice called PDF parser. It's really easy to parse a PDF if you can run it on some server. So basically, there's this asynchronous call in my process. Once I grab the PDF and stuff it into an attachment, I asynchronously call an Apex routine that passes that blob off to Heroku and gets back some text and stores it in the record. It's bone simple. If you're interested in this, I presented on this last year in Uruguay, and I captured the recording. YouTube happened to pick the second of the recording where I'm doing my Charlton Heston imitation of parting the Red Sea. Microservices can do a lot, but they can't part the Red Sea. But I thought the imitation was good. Anyway, you can go watch the presentation. It's linked right here, and it's keyed up to start right where we do the demo. So that is the full content of the presentation. If you're hungry to learn more about how to do this, how to step into more complex development patterns and practices, which are really needed in the Salesforce world, we got lots of stuff for you. That is the course on Pluralsight with Peter Templey. It's about 2.5 hours long. He goes very deep into all the different patterns that are in the Apex enterprise patterns, including the unit of work, which was a hard one for me to grok, and you can watch that. Matt Kaufman, if you don't know Matt, he's an American. Matt's been behind the scenes with Salesforce as a contractor for many years. He has a consultancy in Los Angeles. He used to write the advanced developer programmatic assignments. He wrote the, he was a judge, he wrote the advanced developer super badge. Anybody done the advanced developer super badge? That's Matt's work. He talks about clean code and coding practices. Dan Appelman, who's presenting opposite me, this is a great presentation showing how you can take very simple trigger design patterns and apply them to very complex orgs with very low risk and very little change, but solve very big problems. There's Lorenzo and Robert talking about clean code culture and automated static code analysis tools. For those of you who don't know, Lorenzo Fertini is founder of Clayton, which is a cloud-based static code analysis tool, and Robert Soesman, who's coming to Amsterdam on Sunday, because we're recording again on Monday about unlocked packages. He was the one who ported PMD, which is an open source tool for static code analysis for Apex. So we got them together in a studio, and they talked about the juxtaposition between the two tools. but the importance of clean code and why it's so important. And Simon Goodyear, if you're going to decouple your code, Simon did a great play-by-play on event-driven architecture and platform events, which you really want to get. How many of you have worked with platform events? Okay, so more of you need to get to know platform events. Great presentation. There are lots of play-by-plays. I've been doing this now for 2.5 years where I crowdsource from the Ohana community on expert topics. We publish them on Pluralsight. You can click on that link over on the left and that'll take you off to my author page. On the right, we maintain a YouTube playlist. Every time we put up a new course, you can subscribe to that playlist and you can watch the trailer. Pluralsight is a paid service. It's a learning platform. However, in addition to their normal 200-minute freebie, I've put this together. If you grab that QR code, it will take you to a little web page on my force.com site. If you fill that out, I'll send you a 30-day free account, and you can consume a substantial amount in 30 days. You might want to take a vacation at the same time, or send your significant other on a vacation at the same time. Either way, feel free to grab that. It's just going to ask for your email, name, and address. I want to know what you want to learn, because I want to know what you want to learn. This is my thing. And you can come up to me afterwards, and if you didn't get that. Here's a quote. Does anybody know who said this? You must be imaginative, strong-hearted. You must try things that may not work. You must not let anyone define your limits because of where you come from. Your only limit is your soul. Any hints? Anybody know? You know? It's from a movie. I like movies. It's from an animated movie. The completion of the quote is what I say is true. Anyone can cook, but only the fearless can be great. Chef Gusteau from Ratatouille. You know Ratatouille? Remy was the little rat who wanted to be a great chef in Paris and prove Chef Gusteau's saying that anyone can cook. I like to change this around a little bit. When somebody says, hey, anyone can code, I say, yes, absolutely, anyone can code. Anyone can be a great coder. I turn it around and say, well, anyone can code, but great coders can be anyone, but you have to be fearless and face the things that you figure maybe I can't understand, or I'll never learn that, or no, sorry, that's a bunch of baloney. You can learn the more sophisticated aspects of really great coding and practices. It's a craft, you can learn it. I encourage you to learn it. And I'll leave you with this thought. Are you Mongo, thoughtless, smelly, and dirty as a coder? Or are you Remy, fearless, innovative, and clean, even though he's a rat? So, I'll take questions if there are any. How are we doing on time? Pretty good. Very good. Anybody have any questions? All right, so you're all going to go learn software patterns now. Okay. Thank you very much.